A routine coffee run in an affluent suburb shouldn't end in handcuffs. But when two arrogant officers tackled a black woman to the pavement for disorderly conduct, they made the worst mistake of their careers. Because their victim wasn't just a civilian. She was a senior litigator for the Department of Justice. The affluent neighborhood of Chevy Chase, Maryland, was the kind of place where manicured lawns met perfectly paved sidewalks, and the biggest daily disturbance was a misplaced delivery package. For Valerie Covington, it was supposed to be a sanctuary. At 42, Valerie had spent the last 15 years building a fearsome reputation in Washington, D.C. As a senior litigator in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, she spent her days prosecuting systemic corruption, dismantling discriminatory policies, and holding law enforcement agencies accountable under federal law. But on this particular brisk Thursday morning, she wasn't a federal prosecutor. She was just a woman enjoying a rare day off, wearing a simple beige trench coat, comfortable running shoes, and a cashmere scarf, stepping into the upscale Maison de Café to pick up a pastry and a dark roast before heading to a doctor's appointment. The cafe was bustling with its usual mid-morning clientele of wealthy retirees and remote tech executives. Valerie placed her order paid and stepped to the side of the counter to wait. The trouble began over something absurdly trivial. A local regular, a prominent real estate developer named Richard Hayes, had bypassed the queue, reaching for a coffee order that belonged to Valerie. When Valerie politely intercepted his hand, stating, "Excuse me, that's my order," Hayes took immediate offense. Accustomed to deference, he bristled, raising his voice to demand the barista make him a new one, instantly and aggressively, berating Valerie for her tone. Valerie, unfazed by angry men, calmly held her ground and asked him to step back and respect her personal space. Instead of de-escalating, Hayes loudly claimed he felt threatened by her presence and demanded the cafe manager call the police, claiming a belligerent woman was causing a disturbance. The manager, terrified of losing a wealthy regular, complied. 7 minutes later, the chime of the cafe door announced the arrival of officers Bradley Jenkins and Thomas Rourke of the local police department. Jenkins, a 10-year veteran with a notoriously short fuse and a history of excessive force complaints that had conveniently been swept under the rug, took the lead. Rourke, younger and desperate for his partner's approval, flanked him. They bypassed Hayes completely and zeroed in on Valerie, who was calmly sipping her coffee near the exit. "Ma'am, step outside, now." Jenkins commanded, his hand resting heavily on his utility belt. Valerie did not flinch. She lowered her coffee cup. "Officer, I am perfectly happy to speak with you, but I would like to know what this is regarding first." "Don't give me attitude," Jenkins snapped, moving uncomfortably close. "We got a call about a disturbance. You're coming outside so we can ID you." Valerie's legal instincts, honed over hundreds of federal cases, instantly kicked in. She recognized the hostility, the immediate escalation, the complete lack of basic investigative procedure. "I haven't caused a disturbance," she replied, her voice remaining steadily at room volume devoid of panic. "A gentleman attempted to take my paid order, became aggressive when corrected, and yelled at me. I have broken no laws, and in the state of Maryland, I am not required to provide identification unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. So I ask you, what specific crime do you suspect me of?" Jenkins's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He was used to compliance born of fear. He was not used to a black woman in a trench coat calmly reciting the parameters of a Terry stop in the middle of a bakery. "You're being uncooperative," Rourke chimed in, puffing out his chest. "We are conducting an investigation, and I am exercising my Fourth Amendment right to be secure in my person." Valerie countered smoothly. "If I am not being detained, I am going to leave to make my medical appointment." She took half a step toward the door. That was all the excuse Jenkins needed. "You're not going anywhere," Jenkins barked. He lunged forward, grabbing Valerie's upper arm with brutal force. The hot coffee spilled over her sleeve and shattered on the tile floor, drawing gasps from the onlookers. Valerie's demeanor shifted from polite to dangerously precise. "Officer Jenkins," she said, reading his name tag, "remove your hand from my person immediately. You are initiating an unlawful seizure." "I'm initiating an arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting." Jenkins roared violently, twisting her arm behind her back. Rourke rushed in, grabbing her other arm, ignoring the fact that she was making absolutely no physical effort to fight back. They slammed her forcefully against the brick wall near the entrance, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Rourke yelled a performative shout, clearly meant for the bystanders and their body cameras, despite Valerie standing perfectly still under their crushing grip. Cold steel bit into her wrists as the handcuffs were ratcheted shut, intentionally tight. Pain shot up her shoulders. As they marched her out of the cafe and shoved her into the back of their cruiser, Valerie Covington didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat in the caged back seat, memorizing their badge numbers, the time of day, and the exact sequence of events. Jenkins slammed the cruiser door shut, turning to Rourke with a smug grin. "Let's see how smart she sounds sitting in a holding cell." They had no idea they had just detained the federal hammer of the United States government. The ride to the district precinct was agonizingly slow, soundtracked by the boastful chatter of the two officers in the front. Jenkins drove with one hand on the wheel, bragging to Rourke about how he didn't take crap from anyone, while deliberately taking sharp turns to toss Valerie around the hard plastic back seat. Thinks she knows the law because she watched an episode of Law and Order. Jenkins scoffed loudly. "We're going to hit her with disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order, and resisting arrest. That ought to tie her up in court for a year." In the back, Valerie remained entirely silent. Her silence was a weapon she had perfected in federal deposing rooms, a silence that often made guilty men sweat. But these officers were too arrogant to notice. Valerie was cataloguing every violation. The lack of Miranda warnings upon arrest. The retaliatory charges meant to cover up an illegal detention. The excessive force used during the handcuffing, which was currently causing her fingers to tingle and go numb. Under Title 18, U.S.C. Section 242, it is a federal crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States. Jenkins and Rourke were currently serving her a federal indictment on a silver platter. When they pulled into the precinct, Sally Port Jenkins hauled her out by the chain of the handcuffs. They marched her into the brightly lit booking area. The precinct smelled of stale sweat, cheap floor wax, and burnt coffee. Behind the high booking desk sat Desk Sergeant Greg Brown, a 20-year veteran counting down the days to his pension. He looked up from his paperwork, sighing as Jenkins paraded Valerie into the room. "What do we have here, Brad?" Sergeant Brown asked, eyeing Valerie's expensive, albeit now coffee-stained clothing. "Disorderly conduct at Maison de Café, caused a scene, screamed at a citizen, refused to provide ID, and resisted arrest." Jenkins lied smoothly, leaning against the booking desk. "Name is Jane Doe for now until we print her." Brown typed sluggishly on his keyboard. "Take the cuffs off her, put her in holding cell 3. We'll process her when the system reboots. Sergeant..." Valerie's voice sliced through the casual banter. It was crisp, authoritative, and carried the acoustics of a seasoned courtroom litigator. Brown stopped typing. Jenkins rolled his eyes. "Here we go, more legal mumbo-jumbo." Valerie ignored the arresting officer, entirely fixing her gaze squarely on the desk sergeant. "My name is Valerie Covington. I am requesting my phone call, as is my right." Furthermore, I am informing you as the shift supervisor that I am being held unlawfully. I was subjected to an illegal Terry stop, arrested without probable cause and subjected to excessive force. You now have constructive notice of this civil rights violation. How you proceed will determine your own liability. Sergeant Brown blinked. People brought into booking usually cried, yelled, or slurred their words. They didn't speak with the terrifying cadence of a federal judge. For a fleeting second, a warning bell rang in Brown's head, but Jenkins laughed, slapping the desk. "She's full of it, Sarge. She's a troublemaker. Put her in the box." Brown hesitated, but camaraderie won out. "Empty your pockets, ma'am. We'll get you your phone call after you're processed." Valerie didn't argue. She complied methodically. She placed her watch, her keys, and her wallet on the counter. Jenkins reached over and flipped open her leather wallet to get her driver's license. He pulled out the Maryland ID, but something else caught his eye. A heavy laminated badge tucked into the secondary fold of the leather. It bore the Great Seal of the United States. Jenkins pulled it out, his smug smile faltering slightly. "What is this?" Rourke asked, peering over his partner's shoulder. "Department of Justice." Jenkins read aloud, a slight tremor of uncertainty creeping into his voice. He looked at Valerie. "You a secretary for the DOJ?" Valerie offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised absolute ruin. "I am the Deputy Chief of the Civil Rights Division's Special Litigation Section. My direct mandate is investigating and prosecuting police misconduct." The silence in the booking room was so profound, it felt like the air pressure had dropped. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded deafening. Jenkins swallowed hard, but his ego refused to let him back down. He forcefully tossed the DOJ credential back onto the counter. "I don't care if you're the Attorney General herself. You break the law in my town, you get booked. Put her in cell 3. Rourke, looking significantly paler, gently guided Valerie to the holding cell and locked the heavy metal door. As soon as she was secured, Valerie turned around, looking out through the bars. "My phone call, Sergeant Brown, now." 10 minutes later, they handed her a heavy corded phone through the bars. She didn't call a defense attorney. She didn't need to. She dialed a direct line to Washington, D.C. Henderson, a gruff voice, answered on the third ring. It was Robert Henderson, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. "Bob, it's Valerie," she said calmly, leaning against the concrete wall. "Val, you sound hollow. Everything okay? Thought you had a doctor's appointment." "I was waylaid. I'm currently sitting in a holding cell at the 4th District Precinct in Maryland." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a pen dropping onto a mahogany desk echoed through the receiver. "You're what?" "Arrested. Disorderly conduct. Unlawful. Terry stop, excessive force, false imprisonment. Officers Bradley Jenkins and Thomas Rourke." Another pause. When Henderson spoke again, the fatherly warmth was gone, replaced by the chilling, ruthless edge of the federal government's top law enforcement official. "Are you injured?" "Bruised wrists. Nothing broken." "But Bob, they lied on the intake, and I'm fairly certain their body cameras were manually muted after the arrest." "Stay right there, Valerie. Actually, no, they can't make you leave anyway." Henderson's voice was ice. "I'm making 3 calls, one to the FBI field office in Baltimore, one to the chief of police of that county whom I happen to golf with, and one to a tactical response liaison. Sit tight. Hell is coming to their doorstep." Valerie hung up the phone and passed it back through the bars to a very nervous-looking Rourke. Outside in the bullpen, Jenkins was furiously typing his arrest report, trying to embellish Valerie's actions to justify his force. "She lunged at me," he muttered to himself, typing the lie into the official police database. "Yeah, she lunged, and I used standard takedown procedures." He looked up at Sergeant Brown, trying to find reassurance. "DOJ lawyer, big deal. She was acting crazy. The chief will back us." Brown didn't answer. He was staring at his desk phone, which was ringing with a private number. He picked it up. "Desk Sergeant Brown." Jenkins watched as all the blood drained from Sergeant Brown's face. The older man stood up slowly, his eyes wide, looking past Jenkins and staring directly at the woman sitting quietly in cell 3. "Yes, sir," Brown whispered into the phone. "Yes, Chief. Right away, Chief." Brown hung up the phone. His hand was visibly shaking. He looked at Jenkins, and for the first time in his 20-year career, Jenkins saw absolute terror in the sergeant's eyes. "Brad," Brown said, his voice cracking. "What exactly did you do?" Sergeant Brown's hand was still resting on the receiver of his desk phone when the heavy double doors of the 4th District Precinct blew open. It wasn't a casual entrance. It was the synchronized aggressive breach of a tactical unit securing a hostile perimeter. But these weren't SWAT officers in heavy combat gear. These were men and women in dark suits and windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters FBI. Behind them, looking as though he might vomit right onto the linoleum floor, was Chief of Police Gregory Davis. He was a political appointee who spent more time at country club luncheons than in squad rooms, and currently his face was the color of wet ash. "Where is she?" Chief Davis bellowed, his voice cracking entirely, ignoring Jenkins and zeroing in on Sergeant Brown. Brown, paralyzed, could only point a trembling finger toward holding cell 3. "Keys. Now, Brown." Davis shouted, rushing past the booking counter. Before Brown could toss the keys, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit stepped in front of the chief. This was Special Agent in charge. William Cole, a veteran investigator from the FBI's Baltimore field office, tasked directly by the Assistant Attorney General. "Stand down, Chief." Cole said, his voice quiet, but carrying the absolute authority of the federal government. He turned to his agents. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves. No calls go out. Seize the booking terminal, the dispatch servers, and lock down the sally port." Jenkins, who had been frozen at his keyboard, finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, defensive squeak. "Hey, you can't just storm my precinct. This is an active local investigation. Officer Jenkins." Agent Cole interrupted, not even looking at him, as 2 federal agents flanked the booking desk. "Step away from that computer. Keep your hands where I can see them." "I'm writing my arrest report," Jenkins protested, though the bravado was rapidly draining from his system, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "She assaulted a citizen. She resisted. I was just doing my job. You were fabricating a federal document to conceal a civil rights violation." A calm, commanding voice echoed from the holding cell. Agent Cole personally unlocked the heavy iron door of cell 3. Valerie Covington stepped out. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a predator who had successfully lured her prey into a trap. She calmly adjusted the cuffs of her coffee-stained trench coat and rubbed her bruised wrists. Chief Davis rushed forward, practically tripping over his own boots. "Ms. Covington, Valerie, I am so profoundly sorry. This is a monumental misunderstanding, a terrible, terrible mistake. You are free to go immediately. I will personally drive you home." Valerie looked at the chief of police with a gaze that could freeze boiling water. "I am not going anywhere, Chief Davis." Valerie stated, her voice echoing in the dead, silent precinct. "And this is not a mistake. A mistake is misreading a statute. What occurred today was a deliberate, violent deprivation of my constitutional rights under color of law." She turned her attention to Agent Cole. "Agent Cole, I want their body cameras secured immediately. I have reason to believe Officer Jenkins manually muted his audio prior to initiating physical force. Furthermore, I want the security footage from Maison de Café subpoenaed before the local PD has a chance to accidentally corrupt the file." "Already done, Ms. Covington." Cole nodded. We have agents at the cafe right now, and our tech team is pulling the precinct's server data as we speak. Jenkins's stomach dropped. He had indeed muted his camera. He had also typed a half-page of complete fiction into the draft report on the screen behind him. "You can't do this," Jenkins yelled, panic finally shattering his arrogant facade. "She's a suspect, Rourke, tell them she lunged at us." Everyone turned to Officer Thomas Rourke. The young cop was backed against the wall near the water cooler, his chest heaving as if he couldn't get enough oxygen. He looked at Jenkins, then at the half-dozen heavily armed FBI agents, and finally at Valerie Covington, who was watching him with a terrifying, calculated patience. Rourke was young, but he wasn't stupid enough to commit perjury against a DOJ litigator with the FBI in the room. She didn't lunge." Rourke stammered, his voice breaking. He raised his hands in surrender. "She didn't do anything. Jenkins grabbed her. She just asked what crime she was suspected of. He got mad. I just followed his lead." "You cowardly little rat," Jenkins roared, lunging toward his partner. He didn't make it 2 steps. 3 FBI agents tackled Jenkins to the floor, driving his face into the very same cheap, waxy linoleum he had dragged so many others across. The sound of metal ratcheting echoed in the room, but this time the handcuffs were being secured around Jenkins' wrists. Bradley Jenkins. Agent Cole recited smoothly, kneeling beside the struggling cop. "You are under arrest for the violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, as well as federal evidence tampering. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you finally use it." Valerie watched impassively as Jenkins was hauled to his feet. She stepped close to him, ensuring he could see the DOJ credential he had so arrogantly tossed aside. "You told me you didn't care if I was the Attorney General herself," Valerie said quietly. "You told me that if I broke the law in your town, I got booked." She tilted her head slightly. "It seems the same rules apply to you, Officer Jenkins. Welcome to federal jurisdiction." The fallout was not merely a local scandal. It was a localized earthquake that shattered the foundations of Chevy Chase's elite circles and the 4th District Police Department. Valerie Covington did not simply sue for a quick, quiet settlement. She leveraged the full, terrifying weight of the Department of Justice to enact permanent systemic destruction on the corrupt actors involved. The karma hit everyone who had a hand in that Thursday morning's events. Richard Hayes, the wealthy developer who initiated the false police call because his ego was bruised, thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Valerie filed a massive civil suit against Hayes for defamation, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. During discovery, her legal team unearthed a devastating pattern. Hayes had a long-documented history of calling the police on minorities in his developments and local businesses. When this evidence was entered into the public record, the court of public opinion was merciless. Major investors pulled out of his upcoming commercial projects. The city council revoked his zoning permits, citing character and ethical concerns. Within 6 months, his flagship development company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Hayes went from screaming at baristas to liquidating his assets to pay his mounting legal fees. Officer Thomas Rourke was immediately suspended. Because he cooperated with the federal investigation and testified against Jenkins, he avoided federal prison. However, the DOJ ensured his name was permanently added to the Brady List, a public registry of police officers who have lied or engaged in misconduct. Stripped of his badge and unemployable in law enforcement anywhere in the country, Rourke ended up working night security at a defunct shopping mall, forever haunted by the day he blindly followed a bully. For Bradley Jenkins, karma arrived wrapped in a federal indictment. The trial was swift and brutal. The prosecution played the muted body camera footage, synced with the security video from the cafes, proving definitively that Valerie had been calm, compliant, and entirely peaceful before Jenkins violently assaulted her. Taking the stand, Jenkins tried to play the victim, claiming he felt threatened by her legal jargon. The federal prosecutor, a protégé of Valerie's, simply smiled. "Mr. Jenkins, are you stating under oath that you, a trained armed police officer, were in fear for your life?" Because a woman in a trench coat correctly quoted the Fourth Amendment. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Bradley Jenkins was found guilty on all federal counts. When the judge handed down a sentence of 7 years in a federal penitentiary, Jenkins finally wept. There was no leniency, no police union to save him, and no blue wall of silence thick enough to stop the Department of Justice. He was escorted out of the courtroom in the exact same manner he had marched Valerie out of the cafe, in tight, unforgiving handcuffs. But Valerie Covington's ultimate revenge wasn't personal. It was structural. Using the evidence gathered during her own unlawful arrest, she spearheaded a sweeping DOJ investigation into the 4th District Police Department. The investigation revealed a decade-long pattern of excessive force, illegal searches, and racial profiling overseen by Chief Gregory Davis. The DOJ forced the city into a federal consent decree, a legally binding agreement that placed the entire police department under strict federal oversight. Chief Davis was forced into early disgraced retirement. Sergeant Brown was demoted and forced to rewrite the entire precinct's booking protocols under DOJ supervision. Every officer was required to undergo rigorous de-escalation and constitutional law training, monitored directly by federal auditors. A year after the incident, Valerie Covington returned to Maison de Café. The staff who had witnessed the terrifying ordeal treated her with absolute reverence. She stood at the counter wearing a sharp navy blue suit and ordered her usual dark roast. The manager handed it to her, refusing to take her money. "On the house, Ms. Covington," the manager insisted. "Forever." Valerie smiled, leaving a $50 bill in the tip jar anyway. As she walked out of the cafe, stepping onto the perfectly paved sidewalks of Chevy Chase, she took a sip of her coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, the air was crisp, and the local patrol cruiser rolling down the street stopped exactly at the stop sign. The officers inside, sitting up incredibly straight as she passed. She hadn't just fought back against a corrupt cop. She had broken the system that protected him, remade it, and ensured that no one in that town would ever have their rights stripped away so easily again. It was just another day's work for the Department of Justice. Valerie Covington proved that true justice isn't just about punishing one bad cop, it's about dismantling the entire corrupt system that protects them. Bradley Jenkins thought he was above the law, right until he handcuffed the